Good evening and welcome to another segment of Más con Más. I'm Raúl Mas, your guest here broadcasting from the studios of Cachita Universal in Miami, Florida, with my co-host here, Andres Albuquerque, NTV USA here in Miami, Florida. Thank you, Andres, for being with us.
I stayed over and it's my pleasure. So what do we have for today?
We've got a number of interesting subjects today. We're going to be talking about, of course, these figures, the unemployment figures that continue to sort of get worse and worse.
They're not pretty. They're not pretty.
They're seeing the unemployment rate now at about almost 15% at this point.
Okay.
And then we're going to sort of switch the subject because we've been spending so much time talking about COVID-19, talking about unemployment, that we've sort of forgotten that there's a whole bold new world out there where there's still threats to America's security. And we're going to talk about some of those issues with a special guest, Paul Crespo, who's going to be with us on later on.
Will be good to see him.
And the other subject that I think is very important this week that to a certain extent almost overshadows the whole COVID-19 thing is the exoneration, if you will, of Michael Flynn. We talked about it a little bit last week.
Okay.
The Department of Justice was going to drop charges against Michael Flynn. They did, in fact, drop those charges. And we're going to speak to Attorney René Lamar about what specifically happened there. It was a 20-page document that the Department of Justice presented to the judge, basically wanting to withdraw the case, and a lot of interesting things in those 20 pages. We're going to discuss that at length with René Lamar. And I think we're going to end the segment with something a little bit different. We have a new museum here in Miami called the Brigada de Asalto 2506 Museum in Hialeah Gardens. It details that moment in our Cold War's history when Cuban exiles invaded the island of Cuba in April 1961, attempting to bring freedom to Cuba. The museum is not far away from here in Hialeah Gardens. And last week we had something very interesting happen, last Saturday actually. After 6 long years of working really hard, we were able to get a M41 Walker Bulldog tank for that museum. There was 5 of those tanks that were used in the invasion, and we'll have some photographs for you showing that tank being unloaded and giving you a little sneak peek of what's going on at that museum. A pretty interesting place here in Miami, Florida, that anybody, whether you're Cuban or not, if you have any interest in history, and particularly Cold War history, it's worth taking a look at and worth going out there and viewing what they're building out there.
Okay, so let's go.
But let's get started. I want to talk to you first, Andres, about what's going on in the economy. Obviously, that continues to be the primary news that most people are talking about. You know, we saw again now the latest official unemployment rates, 15%, 14.7% actually. But you know, those figures, that percentage number is actually a little bit delayed because, you know, those figures, that percentage rate is actually based on interviews that are done to businesses throughout the country.
Okay.
And yet we're also getting the raw numbers that are coming out from the states that are being compiled by the Department of Labor. And those numbers yesterday showed another increase of 3.3 million, I think it was, additional unemployment, so that we have now about 33 million unemployed in the U.S. And I've been saying it for some time, these figures that we're seeing, the percentage rates are a little bit behind the curve. I mean, they're not really reflecting what is actually happening out there. And when they were saying that unemployment was 10%, I said, nope, it's closer to 15%. Now that it's closer to 15%, I'm telling you it's probably closer to 20%.
20%.
So these numbers continue to basically show that, you know, this is really taking a toll on the economy.
And
now,
it is.
The good news is, you know, hopefully a lot of these jobs will return. I mean, this is not the permanent loss of employment forever and ever. But the question is, you know, how many of those jobs will in fact return? Because so many of these businesses have been hurt and hurt dramatically. So what do you think is going on?
It's funny because you're the economist and I'm not, and you're asking me, but it's good because it's good for the audience to have a layman's approach to it. So number one, I want to put this into perspective. 15% unemployment for America is a tragedy.
It is.
Mind you, there are a lot of countries that have 20% unemployment.
Sure.
Europe, countries like Italy, Spain, 9, 12, 11%, and that's their normal.
Right.
And nobody dies out there. So Actually, we were 3.8, 3.9. We got to 3.6%, almost full employment. We got to that point. What happened to us was not self-inflicted. It's not a natural correction. It's not an economic crisis. This is a pandemic imposed of us, an act of God, if you will, unless some news come up. But let's leave speculation and politics aside. As you guys in the economic field say, the fundamentals are still there.
Sure.
This is not that a hurricane came and blew the house away. The foundations are there, the house is there. We just got sick and we have to clean up the house. But the house, the frame is there.
Right.
So how many jobs will return? God only knows. But the need for the jobs are there. America's consumers' trust is there. We believe in the country. We believe in our restaurants. We believe in going on holidays. We believe in what we used to do. We only will have to reinvent ourselves and probably make a few changes. But life is not going to stop here. And what's important is that the numbers are there, the labor force is there, the qualification is there, the skills are there. So it just depends on how fast we can go back to whatever we call normal, whatever that may be.
We had a guest on here recently, Peter Asqui, who basically mentioned, and I think it was very, relevant, that, the great crises in history have happened whenever there have been wars, and wars basically devastate countries. They wipe out the industrial base of a country, the physical assets to produce, goods and services, and they also kill a lot of people. And when they kill a lot of people, that knowledge of how to run industries and how to do things disappear. And what Peter mentioned was that has not happened in America. Basically, the knowledge is still here, the plants are still here, the roads are still there, the trains are still there. None of that has gone away. The infrastructure to get this economy up and running again is all in one piece, as are the people that run those industries.
Actually, if there were any vacillations of any hesitations as to should we improve our infrastructure, now this has been the final blow. Now we have to do it. Now it becomes a problem of national security. We have to improve our roads, railroads. We have to improve our infrastructure because America has lagged behind for so long.
Sure.
So this, and I don't want to say this is a positive thing. I mean, this is a tragedy, a non-deserved tragedy, but let's look at the bright side, whatever that may be.
Well, look, I think a lot of people are reevaluating a lot of different things as a result of this pandemic. There was an interesting article that came out this week. I think I shared it with you about how, the Department of Defense may have to sort of, revisit its priorities. This is an enemy that attacked us, and it really wasn't the enemy that the Department of Defense was
waiting for.
Was waiting for, right? It was an invisible sort of pandemic that affected us.
An unexpected attack.
And how is that going to change things?
Yeah.
But, and also this whole dependence on China, for our pharmaceuticals, for our supply chain, for gowns, for surgical masks, for so many of these things, I think is going to have to be looked at again. And I think everybody, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, agree that we have to look at things differently now, given this crisis that we've gone through. But, one of the things that struck me, and I wanted to mention this with you, Andres, because I know you've got some experience in the travel industry, Carnival Cruise Lines is looking to reopen on August 1st. That
August 1st
strikes me as a pretty bold move on their part.
And mind you, they may say whatever they want, but you would expect that no one will book. They're probably overbooked by now.
Really?
People are booked. How irresponsible can we be? I understand we have to go back to normal. We have to put back this economy on its feet, but even though, as you mentioned, it is my sector, is what I've been devoting my life for the last 40 years. I love tourism. I love the travel industry. It is the salt of the earth of people getting to know people and avoiding wars. I agree with all of that. But there has to be a reshaping of traveling. So before that reshaping takes place, I think that booking a cruise, which was, by the way, the weakest link since day one in this pandemic, if you remember. cruises and people getting out of cruises and coming out sick because there's a gathering of a lot of people. The hygienic conditions, as you know,
and
are,
a gathering of people that by and large tend to be older, right? I mean,
By the
most
way.
people that go on
By the
cruise
way,
ships
yeah.
are people in their 50s and 60s who have the money to spend and be gone for
on
2
the
or 3
time at
weeks.
leisure, but then, of course, the most is the weakest segment of society. So yes, Carnival have to restart working. We have to get back to normal. I understand that. I think August 1st is a little bit
Premature?
temporary. Yeah, it's a little
But
bit
you think
premature.
that you think they're going to have people signing up?
They have already bookings.
Jesus.
They already have booked people. I don't know what's going to happen if people get sick. Are they going to be liable? Because we were talking before we started the show. Yeah, no, they're not liable because their ships are registering the Bahamas. Okay, they took the bailout. If they take assistance and aid from us, they're American companies.
Wow.
So if they're American companies, they're liable.
You know, I contrast that with the news that Warren Buffett has basically dropped all of his airline stocks. You know, I mean, America's most sophisticated investor, Warren Buffett, has pretty much liquidated all of his holdings in airlines. Obviously, another industry that has been, you know, enormously hard hit. And yet, you know, Mickey Arison, God bless him, you know, I mean, he's basically saying, I'm not about, you know, I mean, pardon the pun, but we're not going to give up the ship. You know, we're going to basically, you know, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead with the cruise industry.
You know what? When you're Warren Buffett, I mean, yes, you're there for the profit. You're there to make money, of course, but you are an icon of our economy. You are people look up to you for advice, for trends. I would have been a little bit more thoughtful about it. Warren Buffett dumping, because what he didn't sell, he dumped the stocks. So Warren Buffett's dumping his airline stocks means that he's killed the airlines.
Well, you know, look, it's
his money. I get it.
It's his money.
It's his money.
And the flip side of that is that there was somebody on the other side willing to buy those stocks.
You want to buy some?
Anyway.
It's a good bargain out there.
So listen, we'll be back in a few minutes. We got to go to a commercial break, but we'll be back with our guests in just a few minutes. Stay with us here on Más con Más, brought to you from ENTV USA and the studios of Cachita Universal here in Miami, Florida, with my co-host here, Andres Albuquerque. Look forward to seeing you in just a few minutes.
Con una vista, basta.
Bueno, mi gente, nosotras las colombianas sí que sabemos qué es lo que es un buen café. El café Cachita, lo mejor para que comparta con toda su familia.
¡Ay, sí! ¡Ay! Café Cachita, el mejor café para compartir.
Y aquí estamos compartiendo Dame un Like, solo por @NTV USA.
Con una vista basta.
Welcome back to this segment of Más con Más. We're going to be talking now with René Lamar, a well-known attorney here in Miami, Florida, very involved in matters of individual and civil rights. I've known Rene for a long period of time. Andres, we're going to be talking to him about the whole Michael Flynn issue. You've been following that, right?
This has been an insult to American jurisprudence. But anyway, let him explain what happened. But to me, it is the biggest failure in years.
Absolutely. Rene, you've had a chance to look at the 20-page, I think, petition that the Department of Justice made to the judge withdrawing or wanting to with Michael Flynn. What can you tell us about what you found in those 20 pages? What struck you?
Well, it's first of all, we have to thank our lucky stars that we are in the United States of America, and that things like this, even though what happened was a legal nightmare for General Flynn, that eventually things were made right. What the government did yesterday was it filed a motion to dismiss the criminal charges against General Flynn in a 20-page motion, which if you're interested in civil rights, if you're interested in human rights, if you're interested in the issues of government overreach, the rule of law, and all those other things that are essential to our way of life and our civilization, it behooves you to read these 20 pages because it's a bombshell. It is astounding what the government did to General Flynn, and what now the government has finally made right.
You know, when I read through it, Rene, one of the things that struck me is that these conversations, these FBI agents, you know, we're having conversations that are more akin to what you're seeing in like Godfather movies, right?
A la Argentina.
Right. How do we get this?
This is something out of Kafka or something out of a third world country for sure. I agree with you. This is incredible, and they come to the conclusion, which is amazing. Let me see if I can find one of the parts. They come to the conclusion that there's nothing there, and they continue on. When as a matter of fact, one of the people at the FBI, and it's in a footnote. Oh, here it goes. On page 8, Mr. Priestap's notes dated January 24th, and I'm reading. His notes read, "What's our goal? Question mark. Truth/admission, or to get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired." I mean, does anyone understand the depth of such a statement? This is, one of the things that the motion lays out is that in order for you to bring this type of charge against somebody, his statements have to have what the law calls materiality. In other words, they have to be material to an ongoing investigation. They determine over and over again that there is no materiality, and yet they go on to have this conversation with General Flynn, where they pose as allies, as people trying to help him, and they go into the White House. The motion details how they violated all kinds of rules. They don't tell him to have an attorney present. They don't tell him to have White House counsel present. They just go there on the pretense that they're going to have just a conversation with General Flynn to clear up what's been going on with these telephone calls. And then out of nowhere from that conversation, they reach the conclusion that they have to charge a 32-year veteran of this country's intelligence services and armed forces with a crime.
Rene, whatever happened to innocent until proven guilty, man? It sounds like in this case, the FBI agents were saying, you're going to be guilty until we find you guilty.
No,
that's exactly what happened, Raul. If you read through the motion, and again, it reads like a novel. It reads like a conversation in a smoke-filled room among members of the Godfather's, upper echelon. I mean, this is incredible, and it raises a lot of questions. But I think that obviously, you and I are conservatives, and we don't hide that. But this goes beyond conservative, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian. Anybody who is in any way concerned about his or her civil rights and his or her liberties needs to be flabbergasted at what happened here.
Mr. Lamar.
Because, you have a man being railroaded with the full force of the federal government. You have him bankrupted. He has to sell his house. His son is threatened. Over what? Over absolutely nothing.
Mr. Lamar, I want to talk to you in layman's terms. I mean, this is for the spectators, for our audience that they're not lawyers, they don't know the key words. But let me put this analogy to you. You were talking about Michael Corleone. It's like the mafia in somebody's living room choosing who they're gonna hit next. Number one. Number two, usually you find a crime and you want to decide who the culprit is. You try to find whether a person is guilty or not. That is the way we're supposed to. I mean, since Perry Mason, when I was a kid, I remember that was the American way. Now,
I think I know where you're going here.
no. Now they had their culprit since day one, and they just needed to find the crime. That was it. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. That is the issue. That's precisely the issue of materiality that the law is so clear on. If you're going to investigate somebody and you're going to, you're going to charge him with lying to an investigative member of the federal government, the lie has to be material to the investigation. There was no investigation.
There was no there.
Yeah. I mean, this is like I think where you were going, Andres, reminds me, I think it was the Stalin's quote, find me the culprit and I'll find you the crime to fit him, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's like complete perversion of justice,
it's
right?
like Stalin's time.
Find somebody, find one of my enemies, and I'll find you the crime to.
That's it. And I make him sign.
Rene, one of the
even Attorney General, Acting Attorney General Yates, uses words like flabbergasted and dumbfounded. And this is on page 7 of the motion. When she hears that
Obama knows.
The interview is not being conducted with anybody or coordinated with anybody from the Department of Justice. That the FBI just went over there and talked to Flynn without coordinating with anybody. She says herself.
That is very key. Let me ask you about that, because one of the things that's coming out of this, which is another sort of mind-boggling aspect of this, right? Here you have Sally Yates, who, as I recall, she was a deputy Attorney General, but I think Eric Holder was gone at that point, or
Well, she in the motion she's referred to as acting Attorney General.
Yeah, she was the acting Attorney General. I think Eric Holder had already stepped down.
Yeah.
And so she was the acting Attorney General, and so she's basically running the Department of Justice, of which the FBI is a part of the Department of Justice. And she finds out about this because she's in a White House meeting with Obama and Comey. And after the meeting, Obama asked them to stick around, because I want to ask you about Michael Flynn. And she was flabbergasted because it was at that point when she, the acting Attorney General, finds out that her FBI was investigating the incoming National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, and that apparently she was not privy to it, and yet somehow the President of the United States
Knew about it.
and Michael Comey, who was there with her, knew about it.
James Comey.
I'm sorry, James Comey. James Comey knew about it.
Michael Corleone, but James Comey.
Yeah, James Comey, Michael Corleone. James Comey, Michael Corleone. Let me get those two straight. So James Comey and the President of the United States knew that there was this investigation of Michael Flynn, or that they were trying to set him up, or whatever they were trying to do, and yet Sally Yates didn't know what was going on? I mean, that's just remarkable.
And we're talking about a few days before the transferring of power.
If you read further on page 7, the last paragraph starts with the sentence, in advance of the interview, Director Comey determined that they would go interview Michael Flynn the following day without notifying either the Department of Justice or the White House. This is basically rogue actions on the part of a federal agency, of the FBI. They just went, they went there with no purpose other than to trip up General Flynn. And you've raised a very good question that I've seen on the media. This is something that the media had not covered, but since last night, I've seen several people ask, how far does this go up? What is, how far in the former administration does this matter go up?
You remember the famous question made of Richard Nixon? What did the president know, and when did he know about it? Right? Maybe that.
And when did he know it? That is a very interesting question.
Maybe we should start asking that question too.
I have a quick question for you, Mr. Lamar. Regardless of this partisan ambuscade against Flynn, he had people who defend him. The DOJ have sort of exonerated him. Flynn is a 3-star general, is an outstanding American individual. What would happen to me or to you if we were in Flynn's case? What would happen to a normal Joe? What would happen to a normal American person?
We'd be in jail.
Well, that is the terrifying aspect of this. That is exactly the terrifying aspect of this. If this can happen to the National Security Advisor, okay, what would happen to an average Joe if we happen to fall, in the wrong on the wrong side of one of these investigations?
At the wrong time.
It is terrifying to even consider, because remember that the federal government, the resources, the power, the money that they have to throw at an issue is limitless. Unless you are, Elon Musk or Bill Gates or somebody like that, you don't have the money, you don't have the resources to fight against the federal government. You really don't.
And especially not when you're threatening your son as well.
Well, they threatened his son. He had to, I think he lost his house. He's bankrupt.
He had to sell it. Yeah. He had to sell it.
The man is bankrupt. The man is, when he should be literally enjoying his retirement years, and the fact that he is still able to make a good turn his life into a living hell.
Let me ask you something, just out of curiosity. Does he have any recourse now?
That's a very interesting question. Typically, he would not have recourse against public officials acting within the course and scope of their jobs. However, I don't know, and I'm sure his legal team is looking at this. I would not be surprised to find that that these actions are so egregious that they go way above and beyond anything that can be considered within the scope of their functions as government officials.
So does that mean that they can then, sue his accusers personally? I mean, what are the implications of that?
You can't bring an action against them as members of the federal government.
No.
Because the sovereign immunity applies.
Sure.
Okay, but whether you can proceed against them personally, that might be an avenue. I don't, I'm sure.
We left the man behind.
Flynn's legal team is looking at that.
Yeah. Well, Rene, thank you so much for being with us, man. I mean, this is a case I think that is definitely historic. I think as the John Durham investigation continues, we're going to hear really what's been going on behind our backs for so long now. And
Raul, there's been many other things that have obfuscated this and have kept it skewed. But in my mind, this is as big or bigger than Watergate.
Yep.
I agree with you. And my question is, how many flames are there?
Right.
How many flames would there be in there?
And the critical question from Watergate: what did the president know, and when did he
know
it? That's I think one of the things that people ought to be asking themselves in this time. Rene, thank you for being.
What? Again, since last night, I've heard more than one person in the media ask that very question.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you, Rene, for being
Okay.
with us. Thanks. We've had you a couple times now and really enjoy having you and look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you, Rene.
Have a nice weekend.
And we now go to a commercial break. Thank you for being with us here on Más con Más. Raúl Mas, your guest, my co-host here, Andres Albuquerque, broadcasting from the studios of Cachita Universal Studios here on ENTV USA. Thank you.
Nuestra plataforma en TV USA tiene su propia aplicación para teléfono inteligente. Si el sistema operativo de su teléfono es Android, vaya al Play Store y busque NTV USA. Descárguela e instálela. Si tiene un iPhone, debe ir sencillamente al Apps Store, buscar NTV USA e instalarla. Es sencillo, fácil y cómodo. Ahí va a tener las notificaciones para poder ver todos los shows. Igualmente, en los anuncios de los programas de NTV USA encontrará los enlaces que con un solo clic lo llevarán directamente a las aplicaciones de teléfonos inteligentes. Así que disfrute de nuestra programación y esté conectado. No se olvide de darle clip a la campanita para activar las notificaciones. Camina para que te conozcan, que con una vista basta.
Cada vez más profesionales de la salud y personas que buscan tratamientos alternativos y naturales para cuidar su salud están optando por utilizar productos a base de cáñamo debido a las numerosas investigaciones que respaldan sus beneficios. La planta de cáñamo y específicamente su aceite contiene cannabinoides, los cuales se han descubierto que pueden beneficiar muchos aspectos de la salud, incluyendo el alivio del dolor, el alivio del estrés y una buena calidad de sueño. En Longevity hemos aprovechado nuestros años de investigación en nutrición natural y vegetal para presentar 3 nuevos productos que contienen aceite de cáñamo especializado rico en cannabinoides, que incluye CBD y una amplia gama de fitonutrientes. Cada uno de estos productos Longevity combina el aceite de cáñamo rico en fitocannabinoides con un conjunto de hierbas complementarias, aceites esenciales y otros nutrientes con el propósito de crear mezclas patentadas que potencien los beneficios. Hemp Effect Sooth ayuda a beneficiar los músculos y articulaciones, fomentando una respuesta inmunológica saludable y reduciendo el estrés debido a los radicales libres. Para optimizar sus resultados, contiene nuestro CBD derivado de cáñamo, además del poderoso antioxidante glutatión y una amplia variedad de hierbas y minerales. Hemp FX Relax ayuda a relajar la mente y el cuerpo para un sueño profundo y de descanso. Combinamos nuestro CBD derivado de cáñamo con melatonina y con un conjunto de hierbas naturalmente relajantes, manzanilla, lavanda y valeriana, para ayudar a relajar el cuerpo y la mente, así como mejorar tu calidad de sueño. Para ayudar a incrementar la energía positiva de tu mente y tu estado de ánimo, creamos Hemp FX Uplift. Combinado con la hierba de San Juan y un conjunto especializado de potenciadores de terpenos y cannabinoides, nuestro CBD derivado de cáñamo ayuda a brindar una sensación de relajación absoluta, proporcionándote claridad para mejorar la perspectiva mental. Para obtener más información acerca de Hemp FX, contacta a tu distribuidor Longevity o ingresa a hempfx.com.
Welcome back to Más con Más. I'm your host, Raúl Mas, here with my co-host, Andres Albuquerque. Welcome you back to this program. And now we've got a very interesting guest, a gentleman by the name of Paul Crespo. Paul Crespo is joining us from Washington, D.C. He is a national security expert, the CEO of a company called Spectre Global Risk Solutions. And Paul has been in the national security space for some time, started his career as a Marine Corps officer, attended school at King's College in London, and has also worked in various assignments as an attaché in embassies throughout the U.S., and really knows a great deal about what's going on in the world. And we wanted to spend some time with him because unfortunately, you know, what's been going on these last couple of weeks with this whole focus on COVID-19 and the pandemic, we've sort of taken our eye off the ball on what's going on in the world stage. And we still have a lot of bad actors out there that are trying to cause harm to the U.S. And I wanted to discuss with Paul some of those situations that are going on throughout the world. But before going there, Paul, I wanted to ask you just briefly, you've been following this Michael Flynn case. What is your take on that? I understand that you've kind of seen this coming for a while, right?
Yeah, and again, thank you, Raul, for having me. I appreciate
Pleasure.
it. Yeah, and Michael Flynn was also the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency before he became a national security advisor to Trump, and I was also assigned to the Defense Intelligence Agency. I have respect for General Flynn. I don't agree with everything he's done or said, but I think he was absolutely railroaded in this case, and it's finally, I think justice has been served, and the DOJ finally dropped all the charges because the whole thing was an absolute travesty. I mean, they were trying to get to Trump. In 50 years hasn't been used to say that you can't you can't do foreign policy without authorization, even though, again, as member of the transition team for the Trump administration, he had every right to be talking to Russians, etc. So the whole thing was an absolute farce, and I'm glad that finally all the facts came out, and he's been cleared.
Paul, I have a question. He had been fired by Obama previously, right? Before this happened,
Yes.
He had been fired. And what kind of position did he have then?
Well, he was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, version of the CIA.
Any idea why he was fired?
I think at the time, I'm trying to remember now. I'm not sure if it was Iran. I think it might have been Iran related or China related.
Well, I think if I recall correctly, Paul, I mean, there was a situation there where I think the Obama administration was trying to downplay, the rise of ISIS and what was going on, and basically he was on Capitol Hill, as I recall, testifying in Congress, and he basically said the complete opposite. He said, no,
Well,
the threat of terrorism is not over by a long shot, right? I mean, that's what I recall.
Well, I think you might be right, and if I remember now, that was the time when the Obama administration was just absolutely screwing up the entire rise of ISIS, and actually enabling it. And there were a lot of reports about them cooking the books and intelligence to try and downplay the role of ISIS.
Yeah,
so,
and he basically called them out. He basically called them out.
Yeah.
He took a very principled stand, but that stand, I think, cost him his job.
I think that's the origin of everything.
Yeah, that's the origin.
Yes.
That's the origin.
So it was like a McChrystal on steroids, in other words.
Yeah, sort of.
But obviously there was a lot of political intrigue there and animosity between the Obama people and Flynn, and some of these leftovers and some of these people at the FBI that might have been more favorable to Obama also weren't big fans of General Flynn.
Sure. So listen, as we sort of pivot away from Mr. Flynn and look at the world and what's going on out there, obviously a lot to talk about, right? I mean, sort of China continuing to sort of push the envelope in the South China Sea, Iran threatening U.S. ships in the Persian Gulf, and the president threatening to blow them out of the water. Kim Jong-un,
which I look forward to seeing that. Because I think they deserve it and they need it, because some of the harassment.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. I mean, let's start there. I mean, you know, this situation with the Iranian gunboats sort of, you know, harassing U.S. ships crossing through the Straits of Hormuz has actually been going on for quite some period of time. I mean, this is not unusual.
Yeah.
They are increasingly more brazen about how they're doing it. And
the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, all of them do that sort of thing to some extent, as provocation, as a test. You know, trying to see where the line is that they can cross, and also just testing our reactions, et cetera. But the Iranians have been particularly reckless and dangerous in the way they've been doing it recently, where they're doing, you know, speeding their boats in circles around the destroyer. In the Straits of Hormuz is very dangerous, and I think Trump finally said, you know, enough. If they do it again, our commanders are now authorized to use force, so they can sink them and fire back. And I think the harassment has decreased, if not stopped, since he said that. By a lot.
they've gotten that message because, you know, as you and I well know, man, I mean, once you release ordnance, things change, you know, not just right there in that particular geographic spot, but the world changes, right? Because suddenly you've got people killed, you've got, you know, ships blown out of the water, people hurt, and it changes and suddenly accelerates whatever hostilities may have pre-existed. So I hope the Iranians have gotten the message.
I think the Iranians, you know, and the Soleimani strike really woke them up to the fact that this president isn't going to do a tit for tat. He's not going to hold his fire. If American lives are threatened, he will react, and it doesn't have to be proportionate. So, and they do know, despite all the blustering and all the bragging that they try and do, the power differential between the United States and Iran is night and day. And if things do get out of hand, the losers are going to be the Iranian regime.
Paul, I heard like a couple of days ago that the Chinese ambassador to Washington, you probably heard it before I did, kind of said that the blame gaming is not helping anyone, like basically saying, why don't we sit down and talk? Do you interpret this like the Chinese, through their ambassador here in Washington, are extending an olive branch to the Trump administration?
I would not accept or any kind of olive branch from the Chinese Communist regime, because they are experts at the strategic deception game, and if they're trying to downplay the fact that we are highlighting their culpability in the COVID Wuhan virus epidemic, it's because it's striking a chord and it's hurting them where it matters. So, you know, if they are trying to downplay this and soften the relationship, it's because they fear that it's causing them damage. And it's undermining their narrative. Yeah, their narrative that they're actually, you know, the big power in the world that has, you know, conquered COVID and is helping the world recover, and that the United States is a failure. So I think Trump has been very effective in you know, focusing very directly on China's culpability and China's bad actions in this whole pandemic, and I think it's starting to cause them damage. If that's what I see from any kind of efforts from the Chinese government to try and, you know, soften the relationship, it's because they sense that it's hurting them.
And what do you think we should do? Should we take the olive branch? Should we take it from there, try to negotiate a bit, or should we just look the other way?
I think Trump should continue the path he's on. I think one of the biggest issues in the world today is the Chinese threat. So the Chinese threat to the United States, directly, indirectly, regionally, globally, and the threat to democracy in general, posed by the Chinese Communist Party and the growth of Chinese power, is the biggest threat the world has today. I think it surpasses the Russian-Soviet threat from the Cold War. I've debated this with lots of people who don't see the connection, but you know, China is actually the USSR on steroids. It's if you look back, the Soviet Union was very powerful militarily and strategically, but it had a third world economy. The Chinese economy is soon to reach the U.S. Economy, if not surpass it in the next 10 years or so. And it has fully intended and intends to surpass the United States as a global leader and to impose their form of government and their style of repression wherever they can. So I think combating the Chinese threat should be the number one goal. Does that mean sometimes you have to negotiate and sometimes you have to get deals done with them? Of course, but I think the primary focus should be on how to contain and restrain the Chinese and not necessarily work with them.
Before I yield to Raul here, I've taken the segment to myself because the topic is something that is close to my heart. Now, before the ambassador kind of backtracked a bit and extended this olive branch, as we may call it, the Chinese government had threatened publicly the government of Australia. I don't know if you remember this daily something newspaper in Australia that leaks some documents, and I'm almost quoting here. The Chinese functionary, the bureaucrat, said that Australia was the gum in China's shoes and that eventually it would have to be dealt with. That's pretty strong, ain't it?
Well, it's not as strong as the Chinese ambassador to Sweden that says that to their friends they give champagne, but to their enemies they use a shotgun, and it was threatening the Swedes for being standing up to their bullying in another issue. So the Chinese have sort of come our allies, such as Australia and our European allies,
You know,
to push back because the United States can't do it alone, and we need these countries to realize what danger they're in and to work with the United States to create a global alliance against the Chinese threat.
Look, you know, I look back on this, Paul, and my view on this is that, to a certain, to put it in a Spanish phrase that I think we all understand, you know, los gringos a veces son demasiado buena gente. You know, sometimes, you know, these gringos are too nice, right? And I think in the 90s when, you know, sort of China, or late 80s, early 90s, when China opened up its economy to the rest of the world, you know, there was sort of this elated sort of feeling that, well, gee, you know, the Chinese are finally coming into the modern world, and, you know, we're all going to benefit from, you know, China being a capitalist country. And, you know, and I've been to that part of the world numerous times, man. I mean, the Chinese people are very industrious, very hardworking. They've done some amazing things with their economy, you know, as they've openly embraced capitalism. And I think that there was this sort of feeling that
capitalism works.
Yeah, and there was this feeling that so long as the Chinese were engaged with the global economy and were making money and everybody was lining their pockets and, you know, happy and healthy and making lots of money, that would be a good thing for the world, right? I mean, to sort of take away that risk of confrontation with China.
And it probably was.
And it probably was. But what we've seen in recent years,
well, I would unfortunately, you know, it sounds a lot like the same people who said that engaging Cuba and the Cuban regime would change it and make it democratic. It's a flawed premise in Cuba, and it's a flawed premise with the Chinese.
Because
there's no chance of that ever changing. And people always say, well, economic trumps politics. And I said, well, not when, you know, Mao said power comes from the barrel of a gun, you know, not from the capitalists below.
I mean,
so
that is
I think it was flawed idea.
That is absolutely right, man. I mean, so long as you have the Chinese Communist Party, or you have, you know, the Castro's, you know, the regime in Cuba and their successors, that's where the problem comes, right? Because you can sort of show yourself to the world as being this, wonderful ally, but the fact of the matter is the people that are controlling the levers of power are still the Chinese Communist Party. And, you know, as we've seen in these last couple of years, you know, the Chinese now beginning to push the envelope in the South China Sea, establishing those artificial islands, beginning to sort of, you know, rattle their saber. And, obviously, there's a balance, as you well mentioned, the threat of the Chinese is, militarily, they're not quite there yet, on a par with the United States.
Not yet.
But economically, they're
Not
catching
yet,
up.
but they're getting closer every day. And in
They're
the
getting
South China
closer every day.
Sea-
And
in the
economically,
South
they
China
they
Sea,
are
they're
getting close
their-
to there.
Yes, and half of it was the United States and Western countries helping China. Half of it was the Chinese stealing everything they could get their hands on.
Sure.
They have the most massive espionage effort the United States has ever seen. It dwarfs anything by the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
Sure.
FBI counterintelligence people say they can't keep track because it's hundreds of thousands of agents all over the country, and the Soviets were a couple of hundred. So they can't keep up with it. The Chinese are trying and intending on replacing the United States as the world leader. And when they do that, if they ever get that opportunity, they intend to also impose their authoritarian regime. And let me remind you, you said the Chinese people are very industrious and very hard work, and they are, but they're also very nationalistic. So the Communist Party of China has replaced socialism ideology as a something to motivate the people, and instead turned it into pure nationalism. They control the levers of power, but they also control communications. They censor everything. The great wall of information in China is keeps the Chinese people from hearing anything except the propaganda from the state, and they are very nationalistic. And so the average Chinese, and if you go on social media in any way and interact with any of these Chinese that are allowed to interact internationally, you get immediately a very strong sense of belligerent, aggressive, jingoistic nationalism from the Chinese, and it's scary.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole mentality.
And these are the average Chinese, or the average people who are only indoctrinated by the Chinese government. They're not. I mean, they are gung ho about China becoming the world superpower.
Yeah, it is. It's a whole different mentality. It's a sort of collectivist mentality, this socialist mindset, very, very different from the way that we think here in the West, and individual freedom and liberties is just totally anathema to that culture. I mean, it's very, very different. But listen, I think we've got some challenges there. Quick question, because we're sort of running out of time here. What happened with Kim Jong-un? I mean, he had sort of disappeared off the stage. Now all of a sudden,
I wrote an article. So some people have been speculating that there was a body double that they used at the ribbon cutting ceremony, and there has been evidence that in the past Kim has used body doubles, to avoid assassinations, and Saddam Hussein did the same thing. So there's some speculation about that. Sounds a little crazy, but it's not impossible. So I'm not even sure whether that was him or not. And the question of I think the intelligence services still have a lot to confirm there.
Man, you talk about a closed society. There's nothing like North Korea, man. I think it
close as
rivals.
can be.
That's why they call it the hermit kingdom.
Yeah, it rivals East Germany and the Stasi and whatnot. I mean, it's really but no comparison really, because I mean,
it's
North
probably
Korea
the most closed society in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, thank you so much for being with us on the program. Really appreciate you taking time out from your busy schedule. Hope to have you again in the future to talk about some of these subjects in depth. I mean, obviously an area that you know very well, the whole global security realm, and appreciate you taking time out to be with us here, today.
And hopefully next time we'll get some video going.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you, Paul. Have a good weekend. Take care.
Bye-bye.
I'm Raul Mas here on Mas con Mas with Andres Albuquerque. Thank you for being with us, and see you next Friday here on NTV USA from the studios of Cachita Universal Studios.